All right, so let's show you a few examples where you're going to come up with this equation. All right, so let's take that first example. You get paid $12 per hour. Now let's say I don't need the graph this time. I need the equation that goes with this situation. I want to represent it algebraically. All right, well, this is a proportional situation, which automatically means that this is going to take the shape of y equals m times x, where x is our input value and y is our output value. So all we need to figure out what is m, this constant of proportionality, or if we're thinking in terms of graphs, the slope. All right, well, here's how you do it. What we do is we take the given xy units that they gave us here, and we're just going to plug them in. All right, now here's a little tidbit that we need to think about. When you pick what's x and what's y, in this case hours and $12, you have to be careful about this, because x, whatever we choose x to be, has to be what we call the independent variable, and y has to be the dependent variable. Okay, now the way I like to show this is I like to start with y first, the dependent variable. And what we mean by dependent means that whatever y turns out to be, it depends. It depends upon what x is. All right, so when you look at this problem, think to yourself, well, does this $12 depend on how many hours I worked, or does the hours I work depend on how much I get paid? Okay, well, I think that first one makes more sense. The amount of money you get paid depends upon how many hours of work you put in. So the dependent variable is the 12. The independent variable is the hours. Okay, because the money that you make depends upon how many hours you work. All right, so in this case, this 1 hour is going to be our variable for x. So here we're just going to plug in 1, m times 1. The dependent variable, $12, is going to be y. So over here I'm going to plug in 12. And so I just take the 1 hour and the $12 and plug them in for x and y in my direct variation equation. All right, now we're going to solve for m, that constant of proportionality. Well, this one's an easy one. M times 1 is just m. So m equals $12. All right, so to get the direct variation equation for this problem is I just take y equals mx, and I'm just going to plug in what I found for m. So y equals 12x. Okay, so this equation represents this proportional relationship. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If x is the number of hours, all I have to do is just plug in the number of hours that I work. It'll take each of those hours, multiply it by $12, and it'll spit out the amount of money that I make. All right? All right, so let's try this recipe problem. A recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of salt for every 2 cups of sugar. Okay, so again, you have to ask yourself the question, which one's the independent and which one's the dependent? And once again, I like to start off with the dependent one. So the way they've worded this is the salt dependent upon how much sugar I put in, or is the sugar dependent upon how much salt I put in? Okay, now in a recipe, honestly, this wouldn't be that important, but if you look at the way that it's worded, it says a recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of salt for every 2 cups of sugar. So it sounds like I'm putting the sugar in first, and then based on how much sugar I chose to put in, I then know how much salt to put in. Okay, so the amount of salt, at least the way that this is worded, depends upon the amount of sugar that I put in. So I put in the sugar first, that's my independent variable, and then based on that amount, I then put in the salt. So the salt depends on the sugar. Okay, so that makes this one, makes the sugar our x variable, and this is y. All right, so now let's get the equation that would help us with this. It's a direct variation equation because this is a proportional relationship. Y equals mx. X is going to be the 2 cups, so m times 2, and 1 teaspoon of salt for y. Okay, and it's okay in this case that it's teaspoons and cups. The units don't matter. Okay. Alright, so what I'll do is I'll solve this for m. I've got m times 2 equals 1, so to get m by itself I'm going to divide both sides by 2. So m turns out to be a half. Alright, so the equation for this problem is this. Y equals mx, where m, that constant of proportionality, is 1/2. Alright, so x is the number of cups of sugar I put in, multiply that by half, and what'll spit out over here for y is the amount of teaspoons of salt that I need. Alright, so that's a little bit about how to take a proportional relationship and turn it into an equation. You realize that proportional relationships will always be in this form, which we call the direct variation equation. You stick in the information they give you, solve for m, and then m is the number that goes here, and this becomes your equation.